My partner has high functioning autism. When I talk to him about something that's important to me, he will zone out or he will pretend to be paying attention. But I always know when he has not heard me because he won't follow through with what he said he was going to do. He will agree to do something, but later will not complete the task. Well, what could be going on here and what I see most often is brain overload. And what I mean by that is the people with high functioning autism, they're people that are living in a verbal world, but they're actually visual learners. And so in the event that you are giving him too much information and maybe you're upset with him and you're droning on, to use a sarcastic term, for 10 and 15 minutes or more, he's going to reach data overload. But he might give you the impression that he's still absorbing your words. He might pretend that he's listening and understanding. But what's really going on is his brain has literally at some level short-circuited and he's not absorbing the information anymore. And that will occur at about the 5-minute mark. That's why you would want to keep your instruction short and concrete, because if you go long, especially 10, 15 minutes, and you're animated and upset with him, he is going to take a mental vacation in order to keep from getting overwhelmed. In other words, he's going to go off in his own little imaginary world just to escape from this stressful sensory input, which would be the words that you're throwing at him. Another thing that could be going on is he may quickly agree to do whatever you are telling him to do or asking him to do just to get the conversation over with. And this again is he's not purposely trying to be insensitive or to disregard your concerns or your needs or wants. Perhaps the way that you're going about it is stressing him out, and he just wants to, yeah, okay, honey, I'll do it. Fine, yeah, I'll get to it. Just to reduce his anxiety. The other thing that could be going on too is, as you know, he probably has only 1 or 2 special interests. And if you give him some boring, mundane task that falls way outside of his special interest, boredom is excruciating to people on the autism spectrum. And so, since he only has 1 or 2 things that he prefers, and you give him some mundane task that's way outside of his special interest, he's going to get distracted doing his special interest and not get to the task that you want him to do, and he's probably going to forget about the task that you want him to do because he's absorbed in what he wants to do. In working with clients on the autism spectrum, what I see pretty much 100% of the time is the individual's tendency to chronically get lost in thought, usually stressful thoughts. The autistic brain is very rarely paying attention to what's going on in the present moment. Oftentimes the individual is either ruminating about a past stressful event or worrying about the potentiality of a future stressful event, or they're simply experiencing stress in the present moment, the event that's occurring now. And the only reprieve they get from being lost in this rabbit hole of random stressful thinking is to get lost mentally in their special interest or their preferred activity. They're rarely at peace in the present moment, unless the present moment involves their mental engagement with their preferred activity. Now, we all have random unwanted thoughts that show up in our head without permission. We call these automatic thoughts. But when I work with individuals on the spectrum, I have just gathered a ton of anecdotal evidence from personal reports that their brain seems to run on autopilot without their permission pretty much 24/7. You know, we don't have to beat our heart. It beats without us putting forth any effort. In the same way, it appears that the autistic brain thinks without the individual putting in effort towards thinking. In other words, he's no longer in charge of his thoughts, rather his thoughts are in charge of him. He is literally a prisoner of chronic intrusive thinking patterns, and this translates to chronic anxiety to one degree or another, which in turn leads to the strong need to reduce the anxiety, which usually comes in the form of distraction through the use of a preferred activity or a preferred thought stream. So I have a question here from my neurotypical wife, and she states, my husband with Asperger's seems to have a better relationship with his mother than with me. There's certainly more intimacy and consideration there. I don't mean in the sexual nature, of course, but he and his mother are like buddies, and I'm kind of like the outsider in that group. Well, keep in mind that your husband with Asperger's has a developmental disorder. So that simply means that developmentally, his social intelligence and emotional intelligence is low compared to his logical brain. So therefore, this concept of, we'll just call it social hierarchy, for lack of a better term, would perhaps be a foreign concept to him. We could also call it prioritized allegiance. And all I mean by that is there's kind of this hidden rule that when you get married, your wife kind of takes the first spot and mommy takes the second spot. And I don't mean with respect to level of love, but typically you cleave unto your wife, right? And the marriage comes first, the kids come second, extended family members come third, with respect to how you treat people, not necessarily level of love. So when you don't feel like a priority, and you perceive that his mom is more of a priority than you, I think what's really going on there is just a confusion due to low social emotional intelligence around prioritized allegiance. So you could have a 35-year-old man with high-functioning autism or Asperger's who emotionally is more like a 14-year-old. So at some level, it's kind of like an adult child who has never truly left home in the emotional sense. So to emotionally detach from mommy in a healthy, more mature way is probably not going to happen to the degree that it would with somebody who does not have a developmental disorder. So now let's look at obsessive-compulsive behaviors and anxiety in your partner with Asperger's or high-functioning autism. Obsessive-compulsive issues, also referred to as rituals, rigidity, perseverations, or black and white thinking, originate in the Asperger's individual's difficulty understanding the world around him. This creates anxiety, which is the underlying cause for his obsessive-compulsive behaviors. You will see anxiety in many different ways, depending on how he manifests it. Some people on the autism spectrum will show anxiety in very obvious ways, for example, a shutdown. Others will show it by trying to control the situation and bossing people around. Some may yell, scream, and even have an adult temper tantrum. Others may just act silly. So no matter how your partner displays his anxiety, you need to recognize that it's there and not assume that it's due to some other cause. For example, he's just trying to be purposefully malicious. Anxiety can occur for the smallest of reasons, so don't judge anxiety-producing situations by your own reaction to an event. Your Asperger's partner will be much more sensitive to situations than you will be, and often there will be no logical reason for his anxiety. Something that you would be anxious about causes no anxiety in him, while a small event causes him to be quite anxious. When events change, he never knows what's going to come next, and he becomes confused and upset, leading to some form of what might be perceived as inappropriate behavior. Your partner's first reaction may be to try to reduce or eliminate his anxiety. He must do something, and one of the most effective means is to take all changes, uncertainty, and variability out of the equation. Now, this can be accomplished by obsessions. If everything is done a certain way, if there is a definite and unbreakable rule for every event, and if everyone does as he wishes, everything's fine. Anxiety is then diminished or reduced, and no anger or meltdowns typically occur. Unfortunately, it's virtually impossible to do this in the real world. Nevertheless, anxiety needs to be dealt with in some manner. if you, the neurotypical spouse, move ahead before the anxiety has been diminished, it will continue to be a significant interfering factor. So in counseling people with Asperger's and high-functioning autism, what I notice are some prominent themes over the years, and one prominent theme that's on my mind today is, we'll use the example of where the husband has high-functioning autism and the wife is a neurotypical. He knows that something is not quite right with him. He's probably known that since childhood, and he's probably been told so in one form or another from his peer group, from his parents, from his teachers, and then now he's probably, in many cases, being reminded, in some cases fairly constantly, that he's continuing to mess up and make mistakes and making social gaffes and social blunders and so on. And of course he's going to get defensive, but what happens over the years is he gets pretty much worn down with what I'm just going to call low-grade toxic guilt. And I'm saying low grade because it's operating at such a small level that it's almost undetectable. And I'm calling it toxic in that he knows that he has made numerous mistakes, and he has, in many cases, tried to correct those mistakes to no avail. So toxic guilt is different than healthy guilt. Healthy guilt is, yes, I've made this mistake. I recognize I made this mistake. It wasn't intentional. I'm going to rectify that. I intend not to make that same mistake again. Toxic guilt, though, is I'm always making mistakes. And even when I try to undo past mistakes, I seem unable to do so. I keep repeating the same mistakes over and over and over again, and the people closest to me tell me so. And so this is what I'm referring to when I say low-grade toxic guilt, which can lead then to toxic shame. Healthy shame is I have intentionally hurt people in the past. I recognize it, that I did this. I also recognize now that it was wrong, and I do have a sense of shame about it, and I intend not to be that kind of person anymore, and I'm going to try to have, muster up some more love, compassion, and gratitude in my life. That's healthy shame. Toxic shame is because I make all these mistakes, and because I seem unable to avoid repeating the mistakes, therefore I am a mistake. And that, my friend, is called toxic shame. Okay, so now we want to look at why your partner or spouse with Asperger's syndrome or high-functioning autism tends to blame you for the relationship difficulties. If you, for example, are a neurotypical wife in a marriage with a husband with Asperger's syndrome, you probably have discovered that whenever there are issues or conflict, you are the bad guy, and he blames you for the relationship difficulties. And you may have had the thought many times, he is such a selfish, insensitive, uncaring bastard. And what if I were to tell you that that's probably not the case? Rather, the fact that he's not responding the way you would hope is due to one of the traits that he suffers from. We're specifically talking about theory of mind deficits. So let's look at that briefly. Theory of mind is an important social cognitive skill that involves the ability to think about mental states, both your own and those of others. It involves the ability to attribute mental states, including emotions, desires, beliefs, and knowledge. Not only does the theory of mind involve thinking about thinking, but it also refers to the ability to understand the ability to understand that others' thoughts and beliefs may be different from your own, and to consider the factors that have led to those mental states. Now, why is this called theory of mind? Well, psychologists refer to this as a theory of mind because our beliefs about what might happen or what might be going on in another person's head are just that, theories. They're kind of educated guesses. While we make predictions, we can definitely make predictions, but we have no direct way of knowing exactly what a person might be thinking or what their motivations might be. All we can rely on is our own theories or hypotheses that we develop based on what people say, how they act, what we know about their personalities, and what we can infer about their intentions. So why is this theory of mind stuff so important? Well, the emergence of a theory of mind is really critical during the developmental process. Very young children tend to be more egocentric, as I'm sure the parents in here are aware of, and are often unable to think about the mental states of others. Now, as people age, their theory of mind does emerge and continues to develop. So forging a strong theory of mind plays an important role in our social worlds as we work to understand how people think, to predict their behavior, to engage in social relationships, to solve interpersonal conflicts, and so on. So in order to interact with other people, it's important to be able to understand their mental states and to think about how those mental states might influence their actions. So in other words, you connect your guesstimate about what they're thinking with your guesstimate about how they may act based on their thinking. And this is all stuff that you do at a very unconscious level as a neurotypical. These things come about almost at just automatically. It's a natural state of mind, not so much with people with Asperger's. The theory of mind allows people to infer the intentions of others, as well as to think about what's going on in someone else's head, including hopes, fears, beliefs, expectations, and so on. So social interactions, as you know, can be very complex, even for neurotypicals. And misunderstandings can make them even more complex and confusing. By being able to develop accurate ideas of what other people are thinking, or at least fairly accurate ideas, we're better able to respond accordingly. So here is the problem. People with Asperger's and high functional autism have great difficulty with this theory of mind business. In fact, there's a lot of research on this that reveals that people on the autism spectrum have trouble using theory of mind to make moral judgments in many situations. There was one study that specifically found that Asperger's adults were more likely than neurotypical subjects to blame other people for their problems. And this is what I say, you may have experienced this with your husband who has Asperger's syndrome. So the judgments of people with Asperger's rely more on outcome of the incident rather than on understanding the other person's intentions. The judgments of people with Asperger's and high-functioning autism tend to rely more on the outcome of the incident rather than on understanding the other person's intentions.